All right. Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we have a special guest joining us, Assemblywoman Cottie Petrie Norris joining us. Cottie, how's it going? Thanks for joining us.
Good. Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Since COVID, we haven't really been able to see many people in person, so it's always good to get to see the members, especially you, since you kind of came in 2018. Really haven't had much time to kind of acclimate yourselves before all the craziness kind of occurred. For our listeners at home who might not be too familiar, can you kind of give us a little background on yourself and, what brought you up to Sacramento?
So yeah, as you said, I was elected in 2018, and when I decided to run for this assembly seat, it was the first time I had run for office, first time I'd held elected office. So my background is in business. I spent 20 years working in finance and technology for everything from big financial services companies to small businesses to a couple of technology startups. And I was motivated to run for this office because I really thought that our district had been getting shortchanged in Sacramento as a result of inadequate representation. And I've made it my goal to change that. And I feel like I don't approach this job as a lifelong politician or as a political insider. I really do, even as I'm cresting my 3rd-year anniversary, I still try to approach this as a businesswoman, as a mom. I've got 2 great kids who are 12 and 14, and really and truly as a representative of this community. And I think that perspective has served me well so far.
So I guess prior to running in 2018, you didn't hold any like local school board or any type of seat. Is that right?
Nope. It was 2018 was the first time I ever decided to run. And I'll tell you, when I decided to do it was probably the one of the few people in the great state of California, and certainly one of the only people in Sacramento who actually thought that we could pull this off. And so when I did win in 2018, it was definitely a surprise to many in the Sacramento community. But it has been an incredible journey over the course of the last 3 years.
So I guess how did you do it? How did you just woke up one day and said, I'm going to run for assembly? Matthew Harper, look out. You might have great style and a fedora, but I'm coming for you.
I'm coming. I'll tell you, like a lot of people who are part of what I call kind of the class of 2018, the 2016 election for me was a real turning point and a real wake-up call, right? So we woke up on November 8th, 2016, put on our little pantsuits and thought that we were about to elect our first woman president. And then we went to bed that night realizing we had elected an unrepentant, dangerous misogynist instead. And that, I think the silver lining in that is that it didn't just galvanize people like me to get more engaged in politics at every level, to run for office at every level, galvanized people, and particularly women all across this state and all across this country to step up and run for office. And I'll tell you, I think that whereas kind of pre-2016, I might have read articles about my predecessor and rolled my eyes and been a little irritated. After 2016 and after what our nation was experiencing, I was like, you know what? I'm not dealing with that bullshit anymore. Like, he doesn't deserve to have this job. He doesn't represent this community, doesn't reflect our values, and he's not doing a damn thing. So time to change that up. And that's what I did.
And so did you just kind of, I guess, research local, people who did campaigns, or, I guess, how did you get your campaign started?
How did we do? So the campaign side. So we're right now in as I said, welcome to my home studio. We're in my living room right now. My kitchen table is just off camera. And when we first started my campaign, so I decided to run in the very end of 2017. So it was like 11 months, less than 11 months before the election. And it was full on grassroots bootstrap operation for the first 6 months and through the primary. So I was lucky enough to have a small but committed group of volunteers, which were from the kind of nexus. The core
Right.
group was really from my Laguna Beach Democratic Club. And we formed my campaign committee around that kitchen table. Somebody got assigned to learn how to run van and print lists so we could figure out how to do walks and talk to voters. And I think, honestly, in those early days, I approached it a little bit, I think, like as a startup. And I kind of used the same thing the same approach that I had used when we were starting a business from scratch, where it was 3 people around a table and a whiteboard. That was the approach I took with my campaign in the early days. And I'll tell you, what did I do? I bought Wellstone, I think it's called like Wellstone's Guide to Running and Winning or something like that, which was written. So that was our Bible to start with. And then it worked. And obviously as the campaign, we grew from there. But we were really volunteer-led operation and very grassroots up until the primary. And it was after the primary that I think the powers that be and the establishment started to realize that we had something here. And I was told from very early on, like, start to build that infrastructure, start to build that skeleton, so that if it gets close enough and if there's that spark, the party, Assembly Dems, we've got something that we can build on and something that we can come into. And so that's what we did. And we were able to make it happen and push it over the line.
Yeah, because this was a long-held Republican seat, right? And then that kind of 2018 blue wave came in. So I guess at what point did, I guess the party, the state party and the speaker, I guess, reach out and say, hey, who are you?
This might be happening. Yeah. Okay. So it's so funny. I didn't even know we were going to spend quite so much time on looking back at 2018, but it is sort of a funny story. So I did get to, I got introduced to the speaker. And I think actually I can share this story because he'll still say this story when he's introducing me at like local political events. So I can't even remember when it would have been. I was probably up in Sacramento, kind of March, April of 2018. I had connected with Bill Wong and Assembly Dems, and I, had an opportunity to meet the speaker. We sat down, had a drink for like 30 minutes, and I shit you not, he walked out of the meeting with Bill and turned to Bill and said, that's a great lady. I'd love to work with her. It's a pity she's never going to win. And so that was my introduction to the speaker. Because at the time, when I first decided to run for office, like you said, this had been a long-held Republican seat. There was a 7 percentage point Republican registration advantage.
Wow.
And that seemed to be insurmountable. By the time of even in the election, there was a 4 percentage point Republican registration advantage. And even that was largely viewed to be insurmountable. And so the real truth is, while I was in pretty constant contact with Bill and Assembly Dems, and as I said, getting the message of, start to build the infrastructure, we're going to keep watching. The first time they did a poll, it was 6 weeks before the election. 6 weeks before the election. And they did this poll and they went, oh my God, this woman might actually have a chance. And so it was 6 weeks out that like the machine mobilized, and we, the kind of the reinforcements came in, and they called out the infantry, and everybody piled in. And at the end of what was that, November 6th, 2018, right. I ended up winning by 5 percentage points and 10,000 votes.
Wow. And then how did that carry over in 2020?
2020, we did not have the advantage of running against. So, 2018, I was running against somebody who, as I said, had a track record of completely not delivering, was also completely out of step with the district, and was also pretty lazy, right? So, he didn't do a good job as a legislator. It just didn't work on the campaign. We didn't have that luxury in. Exactly. We can't all be good. We can't all be good at everything, right? So 2020 was a much closer race, and it was a nail biter. it was definitely way too close for comfort. So I ended up winning by, so closest legislative race in the state, and I won by less than 1% of the vote. Yeah. So whatever else happens, we know that this is going to continue to be a battleground.
And so I guess going into 2022, what's the, I guess you have redistricting, you got all sorts of things in the air. I guess, do you know how your district's looking or changing, and how that might, help or hurt your next election?
So there are, as you know, there are so many moving parts, and what the direction that we've gotten is not to make any assumptions about these draft maps. So the draft maps last time this was done 10 years ago, by the time the final maps came out, they were so much different than the draft maps. But right now, right now, my district has essentially been kind of split into two. So the good news is that it's created for the first time a district that would be like a D+12 district.
Wow.
Very, very winnable. The bad news is I'm just over the border of that D+12 district in a newly created R+12 district. So if those, if we were to be making that choice today, if we knew those were the final lines, then I will be running for the D+12 district, and be the first time ever that perhaps I'm not a target. So, but stay tuned, and we'll have to look.
Honey,
when are the final
moving.
maps? Yeah, when are the final maps done? Like December 23rd. So, right. I am definitely not the only member of the legislature, as I'm sure you know, who is potentially, there's folks that are potentially running against each other. There's other folks that are also have looked up the number of the local U-Haul company, and we'll sort of see what happens on the 23rd. Right.
Wow. Crazy. So I guess, coming from the business world, working kind of, in a normal world all this time, and coming up to Sacramento, kind of what did you think going into this, and kind of what have you realized, since then, on your assumptions?
So I'll tell you, one of my earliest, I guess one of the earliest things that I was most struck by, and perhaps this should not have been a shock, is how different the political world is from the business world. And I think in particular, in the way that we develop, like on the political side, when in terms of developing strategy, developing implementation plans, and tracking that success. And I think that there are some real opportunities and a real need for kind of the way that we run our government to run perhaps a little bit better if we right. took some basic business approaches from the business world. So one clear example is just in the legislative process, right? So we write a lot of laws, we have some press conferences. We don't spend nearly enough time kind of looking back and saying, hey, wait a minute, what happened with that? Did that get implemented? Right. Where did that money go? Is it having the impact that we thought it was going to have? And if not, we need to do something different. It is, I think, a place where there is not enough oversight and accountability. And I think that's oftentimes because the incentives are aligned to kind of encourage just sort of a short-term view, right? And it's kind of great, get my bill out there, get a signature, do the press release, move on. Right. And I will say, I think that the era of 6-year term limits, I think, was particularly disastrous, kind of in encouraging and sort of incentivizing that kind of short-termism. Right. And I think that we're starting to see some improvement on that as people have a bit of a longer horizon with a 12-year term limit. And there are a lot of people who are not just in it for the press release, not just in it for the headline, and genuinely want to make sure that their work is getting implemented and done. So I think even in the 3 years that I have been in office, I see more people focusing on that, more people talking about that, more people comparing notes about how does your team make sure that your stuff is actually getting done and implemented. So I feel like we're seeing some encouraging trends, but that was kind of a shock. That was kind of a shock to me.
Right. And I guess one thing that you've instigated out of this is the Problem Solvers Caucus. Can you kind of tell us about that and how that came about?
Yeah. The Problem Solvers Caucus, and I'll tell you the name is picked up from a similar, though different, body in DC. And it's in our case, it's a bipartisan and bicameral caucus. In DC, there are, similarly, it's a bipartisan caucus. Obviously, on the federal stage, where majorities are very narrow, a bipartisan group of legislators can make the difference between whether a bill succeeds or fails. And I think we recognize with our Democratic supermajority, a bipartisan group in California state legislature isn't going to be that, right? We're not the difference between a pass and a fail. And that is actually that's not the goal of the group. I think the genesis of the group really stemmed from a couple things. Number one, I think a growing and profound concern amongst everyone who's now a member of this caucus about kind of the just bitterness, the increasing bitterness of our politics and the increasing kind of nastiness of our division, and this sort of weird way in which, particularly over the course of the last 3 years, or whenever, now it's been 5 years, feels like bipartisan or compromise or collaboration are like kind of bad words now and are like frowned upon, as opposed to the things that we need more than anything to have a functional government and to actually develop real solutions to the biggest challenges that we face. And so the genesis for the Problem Solvers Caucus really was to pull together a group of like-minded folks, despite the fact we may have different political parties and not agree on everything, to find issue areas where we feel there's an opportunity for us to move the needle and advance bipartisan solutions to some of California's toughest challenges. And so the issue areas that we're planning to focus on as we move into the next legislative session as the Problem Solvers Caucus are, number one, healthcare accessibility and affordability, and number two, the climate crisis, and in particular, the role that California can play as an innovator as we address the climate crisis. And just kind of, a brief further note on that, and could probably spend a lot more time on this, but I think California has for a very long time, we've been a global leader on confronting the climate crisis. We've got some of the most ambitious climate goals in the nation, the most ambitious climate goals in the world. And it's important for us to hit those goals, right? It's important for us to get to net zero. But it's not actually going to move the needle on a global scale. Like California just putting out ever more ambitious net zero numbers, and even actually achieving those net zero numbers, it is a drop in the proverbial bucket when you look at the work that needs to be done. And so really and truly, the big area of opportunity for us as California is for us to be the birthplace for the breakthrough innovations that are actually going to not just enable California to hit our climate goals, but enable the nation and the world. And I think there are some really, really exciting opportunities. And California we've not been particularly intentional about how we incentivize that innovation, how we invest in these potential breakthroughs, and how we really start to create an ecosystem where we can develop, as I said, those breakthrough technologies and innovations. So one area in particular that I'm going to be focused on next year, kind of in this arena, is related to carbon capture and sequestration, and working to develop kind of a coherent policy framework for that here in California, and mechanisms for us to incentivize that, and hopefully achieve some innovations that will have a global scale.
Did you happen to go to Scotland with other members to the Global Climate
I
Summit?
was not at the Global Climate Summit. No.
Missed out.
No, I did. I missed out on that one. You can't be everywhere all the time, you know?
No. Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, we've had WISPA on the show, and that's one thing they've brought up is carbon capture, and something they see that they could be involved in, kind of, I guess, helping bridge that gap in the future. So that's kind of an interesting area where, there's definitely, I guess, maybe support on both sides of the policy agenda there that bring something forward.
Absolutely. And it's a place where there are some nascent and emerging opportunities. But the bottom line, which I don't know that this is necessarily well understood, is that we are not, if you talk to like leading climate scientists and experts, concur that we're never going to hit our emissions goals. We're never going to get to net zero without CCS being part of that solution. Right. And so it's not about, okay, great, if we develop this technology, then we don't have to stop polluting. Like, this is like a situation, as we all know, it's like code red climate emergency. Like, we need to push on all fronts. Right. And we need to invest on all fronts. And I do think we've got a huge opportunity, given just our state's history as an innovator, and the many kind of pieces of that puzzle that we've got here. I think we're in an incredible place to do that, and also to solve the climate crisis, create good jobs and economic growth for California as well.
Right. The governor just left for, Mexico, but before he left, he gave us some good news that we're looking at a $31 billion surplus, and probably a lot more once it comes to the end of the year and people start, selling some more stocks or Bitcoin gains. What do you think we should do with this surplus next year? Where should that money be spent, in your mind?
So a couple of thoughts on this. And, as we look back at last year, I'll sort of say the same things that I probably said last year, which is that our record surplus, like last year, our $74 billion budget surplus, the opportunity that we're looking at another $30+ billion budget surplus as we move into next year, is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal blessing. Like, this level of resources really does give us an opportunity to tackle some of California's toughest challenges. And I think, certainly throughout the pandemic, fundamental inequities across our state were both revealed and exacerbated, from education, job security, broadband infrastructure. And we're in a position, we're making historic investments to tackle those challenges. And that is, I think, both exciting and important. And we should definitely, we should be bold, we should think big, but we do also need to make sure that we're getting the boring stuff right. And, when I say get the boring stuff right, number one, make sure that we are shoring up our reserves, knowing that, sunny days are not going to last forever. And number two, ensuring that we've got the basics of government working. So alongside standing up a lot of new programs, we've got to make sure that the basics are actually working. And I think throughout the pandemic, we saw way too many examples where that was not the case, right? And most notably with EDD. And with that department, we saw just a totally dysfunctional California bureaucracy that failed millions and millions of Californians and squandered billions of taxpayer dollars. And we're continuing to focus on EDD and address those fundamental issues. But the reality is that the issues plaguing EDD are not unique to that department. And I am a firm believer that we've got to make sure that just those kind of fundamentals of the government and social safety net are functional before we move on to some of the sexy stuff. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of what we should be doing with these dollars, I think that we need to be kind of back to my original point about ensuring that we have robust reserves. We've got to ensure that we are building kind of a solid fiscal foundation and not kind of like, it's like if I had a windfall before I bought a new house, I'd pay off my current house. And as we're standing up these new programs, we need to pay down our debts first. And that's true in a couple of areas. So number one, we need to pay down our now 20+ billion unemployment insurance debt. So as we saw skyrocketing unemployment across California and across the country, we have racked up a $20 billion unemployment insurance debt right now. And again, that might not be a sexy use of the surplus. It doesn't make for a great headline. But if we don't act on that, then the way that gets paid off ends up being like an anchor around the neck of California business, and particularly our small businesses, for decades and decades to come. So I think we got to first pay the whatever checks that are coming due. And I also, as I started to mention, when we're talking about opportunities for climate innovation, I think investing in opportunities for innovation in California is absolutely critical. Last year, I pushed for the restoration of the research and development tax credit, and will continue to push for that this year. So California's research and development tax credit has been a major driver for investment and innovation here in California. And we know that the companies that are benefiting from this R&D tax credit, the companies that are attracted to this R&D tax credit, they're huge engines of our economy. They're also creating incredible, well-paying jobs for California. Right. And I think making those kinds of investments that we know are going to pay off in the long term, and frankly help soften the blow of another potential downturn. Those are the areas that I'm going to continue to push on as we move into the next legislative year.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because kind of Tesla is a company that started here in California. California invested in and has seen wild success, and now has a really high stock price, and people are selling the stock, and we're benefiting now. And has great jobs and all the like. What are some new companies coming up right now that you're seeing, new technologies that you think the state should kind of take notice of and start supporting similarly?
I think our top priority really should be an innovation, creating kind of an innovation ecosystem, as I said, to support companies that are working in clean energy, green energy. These are companies that we know are going to, deliver what it's like, if it's not a triple P or whatever it is, it's people, planet, and profit. If we can actually attract clean energy and green tech companies in California, and if we can actually grow those companies here, we are going to be creating incredible economic gains for our state. We're going to be creating good, high quality, high paying jobs. And we're also going to be addressing the fundamental challenge that's confronting our generation right now.
Right. Interesting. A new session's coming up next year. It seems like you've only had one normal year, maybe 2019. Right. 2020 was kind of weird. Maybe 2022 will be a little more back to
maybe.
Do you have any plans for bills you're working on, or things you want to see done next year that you're kind of tinkering with right now?
Yeah, and the work that I'm going to be doing next year, I think, is really building on the things that I've been working on over the course of my first, 3 years in office. And so there are really 3 areas of priority. Number one is continue economic recovery, and particularly small business support. As think we all recognize throughout the course of the pandemic, all California businesses were hurt, but our smallest businesses were particularly devastated. And we've seen thousands of businesses shutter their doors across the state. And many more are still kind of teetering on the brink. And so in the last legislative session, I was really proud to be a principal co-author on the Keep California Working Act, which would have established a $2.5 billion grant program for California businesses impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. That proposal, we were successfully able to get incorporated into the budget. We were also able to successfully increase to a $4.4 billion small business relief grant program. And capital is such an important part of the puzzle, but we also recognize that it's just a piece of the puzzle, and that California's small businesses are confronting myriad challenges that preceded the pandemic, but have definitely been heightened by it. And so I am chairing the Select Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And there's a couple things that we're working on in that arena to increase access to capital, to create a more favorable regulatory environment for our smallest businesses, and to also improve small businesses' opportunities in contracting with the state. So last year, I'm going to forget the number, but my recently departed colleague, Assemblymember Chu, had authored a bill that would have established a 25% minimum of small businesses for government contracts. And so we're going to definitely reintroduce that legislation this year. And there's a couple other things we're working on in that arena. The second area of priority, and a continued one for me, it has been environmental policy, and particularly coastal protection. So my first 3 years in office, we successfully authored a couple of bills to protect our coastline, including bills to protect the coast from sea level rise, to expand opportunities for habitat restoration and adaptation projects. And that is going to be an area of continued focus, but has taken on, I think, a heightened and expanded area of priority. So as you may be aware, at the beginning of October, my community was hit by the Orange County oil spill. So I represent the coastal communities of Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, and Huntington Beach. And the Orange County oil spill was really heartbreaking for us to see oil washing ashore, oiled wildlife rescued from the beaches, dead fish, pulled from the oceans. And so I am now chairing a select committee on the Orange County oil spill. And our work there is really going to be focused on, number one, getting to the bottom of the many unanswered questions that still surround this spill. Number two, ensuring that the responsible party is really held to full account for all of the damage that they have done to our community. And then number three, learning from this, ensuring that we're making the necessary changes to California law and regulations to ensure that a disaster like this doesn't occur again on our watch. Right. And then the last priority that I'll highlight is my role as chair of the Assembly's Accountability and Administrative Review Committee. And that's a position that I've held since I was appointed to chair that committee right after I was elected. And I'm quite sure that I got assigned that job so I could come back to my Orange County voters and say, I'm holding government accountable.
Right.
But it has turned out that I really, as I think I opened with some comments, I really think that we need more robust accountability and oversight. And so that is going to be a continued area of focus. And I think particularly in this world where as we were talking about, we had a $74 billion budget surplus. We're making historic investments in everything from combating homelessness to building climate resilience to building out our broadband infrastructure, and the list goes on and on. We have got to ensure that those historic investments yield historic results. And the only way that we're going to do that is, I think, to really step up the oversight and accountability function, of my committee and the policy other policy committees that we're working on. So that's definitely going to be a priority as we move into next year. And I think, when I talk to my voters and my community about this job and talk about why am I passionate about accountability and oversight, it's really not just about kind of making sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, or making sure that we're spending your tax dollars efficiently and effectively, though that's super important. I think it's much bigger than that, and particularly right now, because we are living in a moment where there really is, I think, kind of the sort of mistrust of the general public of our government institutions and of our politicians. It does feel like it's at something of an all-time high. And I think that every time there's an article or a headline about government waste or fraud or abuse, it just erodes the public's trust further. And that's why, for me, it is such a critical function, and something that I'm proud to be working on and proud to continue doing.
Well, it sounds like you got a busy year coming up.
We are going to be busy.
Exactly.
Never a dull moment.
Well, if you need any help canvassing doors in Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, or Huntington Beach, let me know. I am sure there's a lot of eager staffers looking forward to your re-elect work down there. So.
Yeah, I'm adding you to my list. I'm adding you to our super volunteer list.
Yes, it sounds like rough spots to the candidates. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time. Really fascinating stuff, and love to have you back on and go more in depth in some of the stuff you're working on.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. Always good to see you, and look forward to doing it in 3 dimensions next time.
Oh, definitely.